Welcome to Hack Your Hascom. It is my pleasure to introduce you to John Newquist, who is a nationally recognized expert in occupational safety and health with over 4 decades of experience spanning regulatory enforcement, training, consulting, and expert witness testimony. As a former assistant regional administrator for OSHA and a lifelong safety educator, John has shaped safety practices across the country, training over 10,000 professionals in the past 4 years alone. Academically, John holds a Bachelor's of Science in Fire Protection and Safety Engineering from the Illinois Institute of Technology and a Master's in Industrial Management from Northern Illinois University. He maintains multiple certifications from the Board of Certified Safety Professionals, including the CSP, SMS, STS, STSC, and CIT, and continues to train through OSHA accredited centers nationwide. He is also a published author of over a dozen books on OSHA compliance and safety topics, including construction safety, using the OSHA Top 25 Physical Hazards and the Big Book of OSHA Lockout. His publications serve as a go-to resources for safety professionals preparing for BCSP certifications and OSHA training. For more information about his very in-depth biography, please visit hackyourhascom.com, and he additionally for contact information as well. John, it is my pleasure having you on. Welcome today.
Okay, good afternoon.
Right. So I wanted you on today to talk about the effectiveness of various safety training programs we have out there. Specifically, HAZCOM is one of those things, as you know, is always the top five violations, and it's
Yes, it
it's
is.
it's one of those easy picking things that we think of should be improved on, but every year, if not number one, it's definitely top five. So let's get into the discussion today. Wanted to talk to you about what do you see as are some of the most common challenges you've encountered when training workers with low literacy or limited English proficiency in hazard communication?
Well, it's about two issues. One, that they want me to do the training,
Mhm.
and guess what? There's a language barrier. So we're going to need a person doing the translation while I talk. And then another one is that they want to do training, but they don't want to provide the translator, which is really impossible, because what a lot of the companies that I've had to deal with is that they don't understand that if they can't understand the language, it just becomes something they sign, which is, it's not going to work for OSHA,
Mhm.
because when OSHA comes out there, and if it's Spanish or Polish or any other language, they're going to have somebody that speaks that language and ask them what kind of training you had. And if the worker, can't explain any of it because they don't understand it in the first place, then it will be back to the company. So, it's a matter of trying to get the company to explain it. A lot of times, what works the best for me is I train the bilingual people in the issues of HAZCOM, and then they train the workers,
Mhm.
and that seems to have pretty good effect.
Okay. Do you find in that scenario you have to vet that first person, the one that's going to be doing the translation? Did they have a background, that they have the knowledge necessary to train properly?
Not vet them, but we give a quiz at the end of the training to verify they understood the material,
Okay.
so that if they understand it, then they can probably do better with the workers. And then we go do audits of every worker every month,
Okay.
and we look at the chemicals they use as well as PPE and other safe practices. So that seems to be the best situation for working with a diverse workforce.
Okay, good to know. What about assessing the literacy and language needs of the workforce before designing a HASCOM training program, or really any training program in particular?
Well, it's a big problem. So I use a lot of pictures, and we have to get a feel for how well people can um, as read the language as well as understand it. In some of the cases, we have people that may not be so good at the literacy level. They might be reading at the third grade level or something else like that, but they understand the spoken word pretty good.
Yeah. Okay.
So if you got a second, can I share a
Yes,
PowerPoint slide?
absolutely.
me.
Yep.
So this is what a typical slide is. We'll cover like in HASCOM. We have I would speak the English, and then the person in would speak the Spanish,
Okay.
and then we would cover the pictograms. For HASCOM, it's exceptionally important to understand that these are the major pictograms that they have to know,
Mm.
and if they know it, then they know they have to do precautions. You've got to work with acids in the middle, then you know you have to wear personal protective equipment. There's got to be an eye wash. Anything that's in the health hazard, we got to find out what is bad about it, and we then that has to have specific training with the workers. So one of the ones I talk about a lot of times, I work with different landscapers and other people. We talk about Bayer settled the Roundup one because the courts have ruled in the jury trials that Monsanto, who created Roundup, it causes lymphoma cancer.
Mm.
So we'll talk about it. Then the person who speaks Spanish in this case will cover it also. And I find, that kind of training works the best
But
of all the training that I've done.
so really, it's a visual plus a person in the room that's translating if you have
Right.
that available with you at
Right.
the time. Okay.
And they've got to have it because you can't really run a company without somebody that's bilingual.
Right.
You have to have somebody bilingual.
Yeah. I
So
mean, they'd be
it's
out of
whether they can
compliance.
read it,
Right.
and the idea is that it's always visual with the low literacy. So
Yes.
we don't just put words up on the screen.
Yes. Yes. And I think you touched upon it a little bit. Would you recommend any participatory or hands-on training methods that you found being most
Well,
effective for these low literacy workers?
right. We always ask about what kind of chemicals they work with, which ones they think are bad,
Hmm.
and uh, and that's been very popular. Also, in some of the groups, they will mention the chemical, and the company won't even have the data sheet, which is not good. They're
Oof.
supposed to have the data sheet for every chemical, and so we show them that you could actually find most of the data sheets on the phone,
Mhm.
and then if you have a translator, you could use that just to do it if you can read. But that's how what I'm running into is that we get the chemical and it's bad. Now a lot of the training is has been computer based lately, and that's been very bad because the computer base is just usually English or Spanish, but it's mostly words and it doesn't help anybody, and it doesn't talk about a lot of the specifics of the chemical. So, for example, the cleaners at the food place who come in at night, they're all Spanish. They didn't realize that the chemical would require goggles and a face shield, not just safety glasses. But the company, who had the data sheet, among other 400 data sheets, never read it enough. They just know it said um, it's going to be irritant and in some of them were corrosive chemicals. And I says, well, if it's corrosive, you're not just going to wear safety glasses, you're going to have to wear goggles. So we try to get the workers to realize once it's corrosive, there's going to have to be some goggles and face protection because you can't have it just splash up over your eyes
Sure.
and stuff.
It's not properly protecting the worker there in that
Right,
case. Now,
right.
circling back on what you said earlier, when you first encounter this, do you ask the worker specifically to bring about an example of a chemical that they're working with, just so that they know that it's
Yep.
something? Okay,
Yeah,
okay,
usually I ask for a cleaner, adhesive, and a solvent.
okay.
Those are the three areas that I see workers use a lot that are could be fairly nasty.
Sure, sure. Okay.
Usually they're not working with pure acids, but usually those ones. And then if, like I said, if I'm in the um, landscaping area, we have to get the pesticides and the herbicides.
Okay.
And
Okay.
we need to find out which ones they're working with because, for example, the Roundup,
Mhm.
the new Bayer Roundup data sheet says immediately take off all clothing that gets splashed on and wash with soap and water for 15 minutes. And I said, so you're asking the company management, like, do you have scrubs for the workers? Because if they've got to take off the pants, they're not going to run around in their
Right.
underwear and stuff. You need to have some other backup plans. A set of scrubs that fit two sizes would probably work for most people,
Mhm.
but you need to think about that aspect because the clothing is going to have to be washed with soap and water for quite a bit and probably just laundered. And because, like I said, it does cause lymphoma cancer.
Mhm.
And we emphasize that this is something you got to have water to clean up with. You got to have it. So like in the landscaping crews I work with, they bring plenty of water because of the heat issue.
Hmm.
So they can use that, and then as long as they got the soap, that'll be great.
You find in your experience the that most companies, like you said earlier, if they don't even have the SDS sheet, that could be a potential issue for them. Do you find that that's mostly the case, that they're not prepared, or are they prepared?
If they're over 100, they're pretty good. If they're under like 25, not at all.
Okay.
There are a lot of times this is all new to them, and they don't really understand what the rules are, so that's why I'm trying to help them and stuff.
Okay. Okay. Good to know there. That's great. How about examples of visual aids or storytelling techniques that have bridged literacy gaps in the training? Any examples of those?
Well, again, if I got somebody helping me with translation, I work a lot over the last 40 years with a different chemicals, so I can tell them that if it's a benzene compound, which is a common propellant that causes cancer,
Mm,
this is an issue that, you can substitute to something else.
mhm.
So, for example, last week they substituted, or they didn't have it substitute. They had the cleaner. It was a spray cleaner for electronic components, but it had hexane in there.
Oh,
And if you got the data sheet for hexane, hexane sensitizes the nerves in the skin and can cause neuropathy
mm,
and other issues. So this is definitely one. If we got to use it, we have to have ventilation and we got to have it. So I like bringing out the chemicals and then showing the people, these are the examples of the personal protective equipment that you need to wear
mhm.
and show them what they need to do because sometimes companies are not giving them the right PPE. For example, if I'm giving them, gloves,
Mhm.
this is not good for any solvents or any kind of herbicides.
Right.
It'll soak right through it. So we need to get something that's going to be like a nitro-based glove, like the blood-borne gloves or something.
Sure, sure. And that's again having something in their hands visually that they can hold and touch and see. I think that
Right.
that helps with
Right.
the learning, right? The comprehension.
Right.
Okay. And similarly, incorporating real life scenarios, and you mentioned a little bit of demonstrations, role playing. Do you find these also help with struggling potentially with learning the written materials?
Right. I find if we can get the worker to demonstrate what they got to wear with the chemicals they use,
Mm,
that's almost all the battle. I mean, because if they know they've got to work with this chemical and they've got to wear like this acid suit or an apron,
mm,
face shields, and a goggle, and we got it, that's great.
mm.
But if we just talk about it, a lot of the workers are hesitant to bring it up to their people and say, "Hey, I don't really have these goggles," and I worry about that. Somebody says, "Don't worry about that stuff. Just wear the face shield, you'll be okay."
Right.
And that's why it's important for me to see that. And then OSHA requires that the employee wears the PPE correctly, and they have it. So, I want to go and see what people have, because sometimes um, we get not necessarily has communication, but we get, I want to say, let's see if I can find an example. A glove that might be very thin,
Hmm.
like this,
Hmm.
may not be good for, something that's fairly sharp. And you need to have what they call cut resistance on there.
Sure.
And same thing with the chemicals in HAZCOM. You need to have stuff that is going to be resistant to that chemical because there's 400,000 chemicals and there's nitrile, there's polyethylene, there's PVC gloves, and not every glove is good for every chemical. So somebody has to have read the data sheet and made sure they have the right ones.
Right, right. And I guess similarly, would you take that moment to tell or ask the employee, find the section on the SDS where it says which PPE to use?
Well, that's not usually because all the data sheets are in English, and
Mhm.
that's my problem.
Uh,
It is a rare company that has gotten a Spanish version or a Polish version of the data sheet.
okay,
So
that's
that's why I rather just talk about it. They know, like a lot of companies have online services for safety data sheets, and you put it in, but it'll come out there, and there's software that will translate it, but if you're low literacy, it doesn't help you,
right.
because you're still trying to read. So I'm more, like you're working this process. This is what we got to wear, and everybody gets that. And I'm a fan of just showing like. Poster boards where companies put this is what you do, this is what you got to wear, and people know. It's not just that you're going to forget. because depends on what you do, you might have to wear different PPE.
Sure. And what about in the issue or when an emergency occurs, right? And if that same low literacy employee has something very emergent, we don't expect it, right? But if they're emerged, spilled on for whatever reason, it's on the face, on the eyes, a really gross spill on them. What would you suggest in that case? I mean, they may not remember, what PPE or what to do or
Well, yeah, I mean, we always talk about, there's got to be first aid procedures taught. And, like I said, with Roundup, we got to take off the clothes, we got to wash it with soap and water. If we get a corrosive, possibly in the eye or even on the skin, we got to put our eyes in the eye wash for 15 minutes.
hmm
And
hmm
we talk about a lot of that issues because they'll remember because, they a lot of times they know this chemical is bad and they just want to know what to do with it. So we talk about it, and then I tell people, if you think it's gotten a lot of corrosives in the eye, then while you're doing the eye wash, somebody's hopefully going to call medical attention.
hmm
You know,
hmm
because we've had some horrific cases. Like when I was with OSHA, we had a person get an acid burn, and he's got blisters and burnt skin, and he was a temp, and they're asking him for his ID when they should be calling 911.
Right.
I mean, if somebody's got chemical burns and everything else, finally, somebody says he's not very conscious. He's slurring his words. Take him to the hospital. The clinic says this is a 911. Got to go to the hospital. He's got chemical burns. And he didn't make it. And this is a perfect example where, the person's trying to do something, and they don't want to send him to the hospital because they got to find out who he is. And I said, no, that's can be done later.
Right.
You need to get a medical attention and stuff.
Sure. Sure. That's an important point. I think a lot of times we don't necessarily think about the emergency case versus the day-to-day
Right.
use of the chemical, right, in the workplace. Um, as far as strategies for verifying comprehension during or after training, do you feel that those who may not traditionally be comfortable with quizzes or written assessments, is there a way to verify the comprehension? I think you mentioned a little bit about
That's
talking to them.
That's why I like to do the monthly audits. So
Okay.
everybody goes out there, watch them do it
Mhm.
every day. They're wearing the right PPE, and we take a look at them. And we may not see them use that particular chemical that month, but over the year we will.
Okay.
And we just want to make sure that people are looking at it. Again, I push the foreman or the supervisor in that department. They're the ones responsible. I shouldn't come out and see it wrong.
Right.
They're the ones that have to make sure. So that's why, we do monthly manager training too, because they have to do it. And like one manager who's on the south side of Chicago, he says, after 12 years, I've had, 120 hours of safety training, and he says, I'm actually pretty good. Our department has had an issue in, 7, 8 years now where we used to have two or three, every quarter.
Right.
And he says, I'm picking up the stuff up there. I know which chemicals we got, and then I work with the crew. And of course, we also did management training too, because good worker doesn't mean you're a good manager too. So,
Sure. Sure. And I think that says a lot to having a proactive approach versus the reactive that we typically get in the workplace.
right.
So great. As far as do you feel like you could gather feedback from these low literacy workers about the clarity of the training and the usefulness? And if so, do you use this feedback to improve your future sessions of training?
Sure, sure. I mean, we always ask them, about what they thought about the training. What do they, I always ask them, what do you need to do your job better?
Mm.
You got everything you need to do because what I'm and it's every new employee. They when the material wears out on the glove, they don't want to ask for it. They think they might have done something wrong. And I've got, cases every year where I have gloves with holes because the chemicals burn through it and they're still trying to use it and it's like, no, you got to get it. And then, it goes back to the supervisor. Like, how come I'm catching this guy's got gloves with holes?
Mhm.
And they want to say, well, you should have brought it up to me. But I says, no, you're supposed to look. If I'm walking around and see it, you can see it. I don't want to hear about, I'm doing this once a month and you're there 8 hours a day. So
Right.
you should be catching this. And
Right.
and after a while, we can realize some supervisors, they may not be a good supervisor. They don't care.
Right.
So I find, when I get supervisors that are good and they check around every day, and they get it and they budget it, it makes a difference.
Yeah. And versus that could say something bigger about the safety culture in particular.
Right.
If the worker
Right.
feels afraid or not, or open, if there's a culture
Right.
that's already there, that can improve upon that.
Right.
Okay. What about do you feel the role of peer trainers or bilingual employees that they play an important role in supporting the hazard communication training?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Because once they understand their responsibilities, they understand why they've got to do it, and the company's supporting it, they tend to be pretty good about working with the workers and making sure they've got it.
Uh,
For example, most companies now we have like kind of like a safety room where respirators, gloves, eye protection, and everything, and the supervisors have access to it.
mhm.
We have a camera, so nobody's going to just take 100 things and walk away.
Sure.
But it's just a way to check it. We don't need to have somebody come up there and say, "Hey, boss, I need to get it." I want them to go right into the room and get it instead of trying to go through a layer because maybe I'm off that day and now the workers don't get it. So we try to encourage that. The place I was at yesterday, they've got Granger who brought in vending machines for all the PPE. The employee just types in their code and they get the PPE,
Mm,
and
okay.
it works out pretty good.
Great. Great. Those are some great improvements that are out there in the workplace that hopefully our listeners can, react to and improve on in their workplaces. So, what about any methods you use to observe or measure whether workers are applying on the job after the training?
Yeah, I mean, I usually try to go in the first 30 days and do an assessment, ask them what do they know,
Mhm.
because sometimes, even like with an accident investigated just recently, that they didn't do the method right, and then they got cut on their own. And even though they have cut resistant gloves, it hit the forearm, and again they're supposed to cut away from them. But I was looking at the training, that they go through, which I don't teach the orientation
Mhm.
training, but um, it's a lot of words in 4 hours. And somebody being told that and signing off on a 4 hour block of training is not as good as maybe did somebody in the supervisor watch them. And again, the person had been there for 7 days, and the supervisor said, I never saw him do the process. And I said, well, there's a problem with that because you have to go in and watch them because they're going to more likely get hurt in 30 days than somebody been there for 10
Right.
years. So you need to watch them, make sure they've got the right stuff because they're the one that's going to be coaching them and training them.
Sure.
And so we try to make sure that they got somebody out there that's going to work with them the first 7 days, and then if we come back 30 days, that they should be pretty good on it. We can ask them questions and stuff.
So it's typical for you to follow up with like within the next 30 days of a training on
Yeah,
most
30
sites?
days.
Okay.
Yeah, some companies they give them like a green vest or a green hard hat to indicate they're new employees,
Okay.
and I mean, it's not bad. It means everybody's watching out for that new person.
Right.
But if you get a 55-year-old person's got a green heart, they hate it. They just like, oh my, I've been 30 years and now I gotta, you're making me feel like I'm a
A sh-
19-year-old kid.
shame. Yeah, right. It's a shame
It's
thing.
kind of a shame.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not a fan of it, but I understand why some do it.
Sure. Interesting. That's a new one for me. I've heard that as a way to look out for them, but I guess whatever it takes, if there's some visual cue for
Right.
that, it makes sense. But
Right.
okay. Any particular workplaces? You mentioned a few already that stand out to you. I know OSHA at one time had a directive to look at like nail salons, which is typically a low literacy and a whole foreign workforce that's not Spanish, not Polish,
Right.
it's Vietnamese and other languages. Have you ever had any experience there?
Yeah, I mean, I was surprised that, if acetone is the primary remover for the nail polish, you can smell it, but the exposures were pretty low.
Hmm.
But it was tough to get the industry to go to the gloves with the polish because a lot of them believed that, the gloves weren't necessary because if you paint correctly, you don't get it on you, and
Right.
therefore but and it just takes training to tell people that acetone is a solvent. It goes through your skin. It's not good for you. It's not going to cause cancer, but I always tell people that I've been around enough where something that doesn't cause cancer that finally does become cancer, like formaldehyde and methylene chloride, all these chemicals, 30 years ago were considered okay, and now we found out they cause cancer. So I tell people solvents and adhesives, are not good to get on your skin, and you need to be wearing protection, and
Sure.
even if it's nail polish. And so um, that was it. And so I see, because I know people go to nail salons. So I would say probably 50% are wearing it. The salons have the gloves. It's just trying to get the individual nail technician to wear it.
Right, right. What about ventilation issues too? Do you ever comment on those?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's times, I wish I had the meter with me so I can measure the solvent level and stuff, but I always look at it as, those you'll smell it, but if it's starting to hit your eyes and you're coughing, that's it. I mean, I was dealing with a person Friday in another industry, a steel industry, where they walked in the room, they started coughing. He says, "What's the chemical?" And again, it's a pretty nasty chemical and pretty hazardous that's slowly leaking. Not like, I mean, I'm talking a drip, but he coughed, and the other people says you'll get used to it, and
Yes.
it's like, no, that's not the way it works.
Right.
And again, there's a lot of workers in there been a while, and they're not going to say anything because it's a bigger company, but this is the issue of that he's bringing it up, and I says, no, this is one of the nastiest chemicals I've seen, so they need to get to fix the leak, but you got to get the ventilation, which is missing. It's slow. Um, they've got to have negative pressure respirators. So, that's the meeting Tuesday. They finally agreed they're going to wear negative pressure respirators while they sample for the levels because this stuff is exceptionally nasty, and it can cause a pulmonary sensitization and other things where you can be near the chemical and you'll have rashes and
Mm.
a whole bunch of issues. But it's just again, the workers got training once at HAZCOM. They don't really bring anything in. Well, this stuff is pretty nasty, and that's where if anybody walked in the room, you probably would cough too.
Right. Right. And I think that goes back to the fact that why is it that the top five violations, right? We get set in our ways at the workplace, right? And
Right.
and we just lose sight of that. We're like, I already did my training. I'm not required to anymore. Well, here's the
I
reason.
mean, every place I work with, we do it every year.
Okay.
We do it every year with all the managers. We talk about it because we want people to constantly remember that we don't want you to be the guinea pig. Things change over time, and we want you to have the right PPE to do this because, like I said, I mean, something simple like hexane. I know people personally that got the exposure over a couple years, and next thing you know, they get their hands can't grip anything. They don't feel pain. They got drop feet. When they walk, they trip over time because of the nerves in the body are damaged. And it's just a simple propellant. If you went to something like butane, which is in all the lighters, it would have been a lot easier. But somebody put it in this chemical, and I says, no, we're going to substitute and get this one out because it's nasty.
Yep.
Just like one of the places in Chicago, they're painting wood and they use benzene, which is a cancer-causing chemical. I says, not only do you have something that you're spraying with cancer, you now got to do a benzene program, benzene training every year. You have to do medical evaluation. It's going to cost you thousands of dollars instead of going getting something that has like toluene or um,
Substitute. Yeah.
xylene or something else, which is a lot less hazardous.
Right. Right. Well, excellent points there. How do you feel about fostering a proactive safety culture where the workers feel comfortable asking questions and seeking clarification, regardless of their safety or literacy level?
Well, like I said, the best places are the ones where people ask questions and they bring up things.
Mhm.
Like when I was with a company we called John Burns, we were doing the audits. Um, we come out, workers would come us and say, "Hey, I need this, I need this, I need this," because Kevin, who was the safety person, he had everything in his truck when he came out to the construction sites. He had gloves, he had vests, he had everything in there, and that worked out well. And that's what we want to do. We want to make the employee be able to get this, comfortable asking questions and bringing it up. And a lot of times, we get calls from the managers like, "Hey, this chemical doesn't is giving some people rashes. What do you think?" And then we go through it, but we wanted to bring it up, and we, and again, it's nice. Again, I always tell people, you hopefully we got a good manager who brings it up, and that's what we want to see. We want to get the managers to work with employees and ask them, what are you working with, looking at their skin, because I was on the one of the Metro jobs, and one of the things I was looking at is I was thinking, wow, everybody's got this big rash and forearm burns. At first you think, well, somebody got a little grease spilled on them, and I started realizing, I says, oh my God, the uh, uh, the what is it? The black oil in the railroad ties
Uh,
is
Creosote.
burning their skin.
Yeah.
Creosote, that's what it is. And again, nobody's bringing it up because it's in there, and that's why we tell people, if you get a rash, it's a lot easier to deal with when it's small. But we end up having 13 workers with creosote burns, and it's just because they didn't wear the PPE, and the way they were handling the stuff increased the load. And of course, in summer the creosote comes out quicker than the winter,
Mm.
and again, no training on the hazards of it, nothing in there, and it was just a breakdown of that type of a job for that crew because they don't ever do this except for this one time.
Mm.
But again, that we're trying to get people to work with it. So I really try to focus on when you get a new chemical and it's got some issues like solvents or adhesives, ask the worker how is it? Because sometimes like in the one they bought a coil cleaner for air conditioning. You spray between the coils and it gets all the they go, oh, this is bad chemical.
Boy.
And then we get in there and we say, this isn't what we bought. Where did you get this?
Oh no.
And somebody ran out of what they had in the cabinet and they went and bought something at Home Depot, which is much worse.
Oof.
And so that's what we want to get. And we ask because that's why we go out every month. What do you think? Anything that you think's out there, and that's what we want to get is somebody say, coil can is bad.
Mm.
And and then we go in there and we say, holy smokes, let's get this out of here real quick and get the other one because
Right.
the other one wasn't bad. It's just that whatever reason, it's tough to get it in there. They don't want to say, hey boss, I don't want to use this cleaner, but a lot of times the boss like, what's this coil cleaner? What's the difference? It's the same,
Right.
but it isn't.
Right. Not only
So
that, you found a purchasing workaround that they're doing without even
that's
notifying.
exactly it.
Yeah.
We're out of it. Just go to the store and get it. I
Oof.
mean, it's only $10, so it's not like it's going to kill somebody. They just take the company credit card and they buy it because, the regular person who'd buy it, it'd be there for a week,
Sure.
might be in there. So,
Job's got to
but we're
get done.
trying to get a culture where, we push it. And what I like to do is, we like to bring up like safety suggestions. When somebody says that cleaner's bad, that's a positive. We
Mm.
want to reward that. We can put, let's say, 5, 10 of these suggestions in and draw, gift cards
Mm.
for gasoline, and things like that, because these are a lot easier to do when they bring up suggestions related to production quality, safety, damage, or something before it becomes very expensive.
Sure.
And that's a big deal.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, great suggestions and thoughts here. Any parting thoughts while we conclude here today?
I think, like I said, we got so many chemicals, and people just tend to get the data sheets and not really read them. And I think that's, it doesn't hurt to pick, a few a month and just go through them and see what they are and make sure there's nothing in there that, it's got a nasty pictogram or, it's going to require PPE that you didn't expect
Mm.
and everything else. And instead of just putting it in a computer PDF and
Forgetting
not
about
really
it.
doing much,
Right.
forgetting about it.
Right. Well, great. Well, thanks again, John. I want to thank you for
All right.
taking part in today's conversation. Again, please visit hackyourhascom.com for the full information to contact John. I'm sure he'd be happy to help answer some questions. We'd be happy again to have you on at a future episode.
All right.
You have a great day. Thanks, John.
Thank you very much.
All
Take
right.
it easy.
Take care.